So we talked about minimum wage
Yes.
and maximum hours. And where we were about to get into is the second New Deal. And I told you, I believe, for our purposes, the biggest thing to walk away from the second New Deal, criticisms. I'm ahead of myself. So even though farm income was raised, you begin to see some improvements. Consumer expenses are going to rise also. So if your wages go up, but your expenses go up, it really doesn't help, right? For instance, if my wages go up, but then my mortgage doubles, then if anything, I'm worse off than I was before, right? And so you do have people that things are getting better, but other things are not getting better. Taxpayers are having to make up the subsidy. We kind of talked about that already, right? You're paying a subsidy to farmers, but who pays for it? And so that's controversial. And I'm not telling you any of these things are right or wrong. I want you to see both sides of the issue. We need to help farmers. Why? Because we need food. On the flip side, helping farmers costs us money, and then they're raising prices on that side. And so it's very tricky. All right. The deal is also some people are still hurting, and there are people taking advantage. And you see that with every government program, right? You see people that take advantage of the system. There's always during post-Katrina, they had evacuation money. As it's post-Katrina as a whole big blur of complication. But there was this criticism, and this video circulated YouTube with this one woman who talked about that she had gotten money from FEMA. And she's like, and I could only afford one flat screen TV, and I need two. And you can get flat screens today pretty cheap. They may not seem cheap to you, but I remember when they were really expensive. You can, depending on what you want to get, you can get a pretty decent sized TV for what used to a pretty small TV cost. Why? Because there's more of them. The technology's been out longer, and the longer technology's out, that specific technology goes down in price. It devalues. Now, it's a supply and demand thing. The more there is, the less the expense, generally. So anyway, there's a lot of criticism of these things. And so I want to talk to you about a few of the most famous critics of FDR. The first one is Father Charles Coughlin. He is a radio priest. He's a regular priest, but he has a radio talk show.
I know some weird police controls happening about curing it through the TV.
Well, he's a political priest. He's very interested in politics and what he feels like Roosevelt should be doing. And so you see people like Father Charles Coughlin. And, again, with these guys, I don't think that they're necessarily good, bad, or ugly. And so he criticizes the president on the radio. But first of all, he can do that. Why? Because he lives here. It's kind of our right, that we can criticize if we live here. Secondly, he brings some ideas to the table, including that he says that elderly people need a pension. One thing, if you are close at all to maybe some elderly family members, the term Social Security has come up, I'm sure, at least at some point in your life, in Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare and Medicaid we won't touch until we get to Lyndon Johnson. So those are a few years down the road, or a few years literally down the road. Conversation for a different day. However, it's a good one, but it's conversation for a different day. I don't want to dive off into something. But with this, the idea behind Social Security is not to be your only retirement. And this is something that is important that you grasp now. So you are about to enter, before you know it. Some of you in 2 years from now, you will choose to graduate early. Some of you, it'll be 2 and a little over or a little less than a half. But graduation is coming. And then you're going to start looking at college or trade, whatever your route is to go next, or even if you enter the workforce. No matter what you do, one of the things you're going to have to think about from a young age, and you're like, well, why do I have to think about that from a young age? Because the younger you start saving for these things, the less money you have to save. Compound interest is your friend. Next year, if you haven't, you'll take a CCR class, and you're going to learn a lot about finances and compound interest. And I will give you a couple of quick examples. If your first job that you get has a 401k, or if you have anything like that, mine's deferred compensation, you can put money in that. And if you start doing that when you're young, I took my first job here when I was 23 years old. Yes, I had to think. My first job in Decatur, I was 21, but because I did not stay, I could not roll over my deferred comp. So I started initially every month, $40 or $50 would come out of my paycheck before I ever saw my paycheck, which you will learn. If that happens, then you don't even know you made the money. And that money is rolled into an account for when I retire, that I can have that on top of my retirement. And then every couple of years, whenever I think about it, when it's time to do that, I up the amount that comes out every month. Why? Because an extra $10 a month disappears and you don't really realize it. But when I'm 55 years old and I don't have any desire to work anymore at that point, if that's the case, then I can have that to travel. I can have that to do others. Why? Because I have a retirement. Mississippi offers to educators, to other government employees, a system called PERS, which is the Professional Educators Retirement System. And every month, part of my check goes into that. And so when I reach that amount of time, I will be retired and I will draw money. Now, when I turn 65, unless that number goes up, which is very possible, Congress is talking about raising that, which they do because workers are living longer. And also because in the 90s, they borrowed from Peter to pay Paul and took money out of Social Security because there was a surplus. That's why there's a problem with Social Security. That's a whole nother conversation also for a different day, which, by the way, if anybody else did that, that would be called embezzlement. But anyway, so another story, different day. So anyway, that means that if something happens with Social Security, which it very well could, our government could do away with that, then guess what? I still have retirement. And so technically, that's not capitalism. Because if you get injured or all that stuff, that is pure socialism, actually. Yeah. So, but they can in any system, sweetheart. Don't pretend that they wouldn't do it. I hate dishonesty. That would be my bigger issue. Don't put money that people have paid out of their pocket into something you don't the American people. But I agree with your premise on which you're saying that it is not right to do that. That's like you giving me money for cookies and I'm like, oh, you can't have your cookies now because I wanted this. That's what it is. But anyway, so my point with telling you this is you're going to get opportunities as you enter the workforce to do things like pay into Social Security. For most jobs, you don't get a choice. You're going to get opportunities to pay into retirement systems. Do it. Do it because you can learn to live on what you make pretty much. And if you start doing it from the beginning, then you learn to live on that. If you learn to live on a higher amount and then try to take it out, it's not as good. Also, the amount I had to put in every year at the age of 23, if I would have waited till I was 28, you will see it would have cost me $50,000 interest for 5 years that I do nothing with. Assuming the projections go the way they're supposed to. At any rate, I want to be able to take care of things if something were to happen. And that was my family needs things. And so these are things when you get that opportunity, and it will happen for you guys before you know it. And occasionally my students will say, well, what if money's no good anyway? So you're better if you can, especially those kind of investments. If you get 401ks too, this is all free nuggets today. A lot of times your company, not education, match your contribution to your 401k. If they do that, do the maximum. If they'll match $100 a month, then matching basically just by you putting that in, you're getting another 100 for it. So it's pretty cool, but hopefully when those things come up, it's going to click with you. I need to do this. So Father Charles Coughlin realized a lot of elderly people didn't have anything. High school, actually, I had a friend all in my life, in fact, when we were growing up. Our moms were pretty much pregnant at the same time, a small town. And I've known Sharice all of my life. Sharice and I made some very different life choices at very young ages. And she got in a lot of legal trouble. She was in her early 20s because she did a lot of illegal things and spent some time in jail. Now, she lived with her grandparents. And I'll never forget, I was back home at the Walmart. My mother had never worked a job where she paid Social Security. She baked wedding cakes, and she was like everybody in town. They bought their wedding cakes from her. So she didn't do it she did it as a business, but it was an under the table business. She could sew anything, and Miss Parkey would sew for people, but again, things she was paid for under the table. And so in their retirement years, she and her husband and he was a farmer, so he didn't pay into Social Security. So they were in their late 80s, and Miss Parkey was eaten up with cancer. And they had spent every bit of their life savings on Sharice, trying to get her out of legal trouble, trying to keep her out of jail and all these things. And I saw Miss Parkey standing at Walmart as a greeter in a little blue vest. And I walked up and spoke to her because I said, Miss Parkey, I heard you haven't been feeling well. Are you better? And she's like, no, it's one of my better days. And so they let me come in. And I realized she was having to work when she definitely didn't need to be working. Why? Because she had no Social Security. And so this is why these are the kind of people that Father Charles Coughlin saw, that they weren't able to, they didn't get anything and they didn't save. And so here they are in these rough times in their life where she's basically just trying to take care of herself. And anyway, loved those two people, but also don't be a burden on people. But that's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother day. But anyway, keep your nose clean and, All right. Of course, Huey Long, who is nicknamed the Kingfish. Why the Kingfish? Because he wants to make every man a king. The idea that we can all be kings. We can all be happy. Everybody can have the same amount. And, of course, that is very appealing. There's a couple of stories about him I really like. You heard that he was assassinated. He was assassinated by one of the guys who was a relative of one of his competitors, a son-in-law.
61 bullets in that man.
Oh, they didn't play with him.
They took him
He
down.
shot one bullet.
Yeah.
They shot 61.
And there's a small group that believes there's a conspiracy with that. It's a good story anyway.
It's an assassination that they literally had to conspire to assassinate.
But-
He got assassinated. That guy got demolished.
Is about one of his speeches he was giving on a stage. And this man screams from out in the audience, "Shut up, USOB." And Huey Long said, "Well, why don't you come up here on the stage and let's have that conversation." And so the guy walks up on the stage and he says it again, and he and Huey Long in the middle of this speech. And this guy's with the campaign manager, and he's like, "We got to go break him up." And he said, "Why? That's his brother." And so he and his brother have like an actual fist fight during the middle of one of his. But I mean, it fits, right?
Who won? Who won?
I don't know. That's a good question, but it's so fit.
Funny brotherly thing, or did they actually hate each other?
They actually hate. To add to that, the fact that the guy ran as he was governor and decided he also wanted to be senator at the same. I mean, like he's a lot.
You know what? I'm gonna say it right now. He probably just did it in public so he'd have witnesses.
Absolutely.
Everybody knew he'd beat him. I'm just saying.
So probably so. Roosevelt's second administration. Now, I've said this to you before. Every president has a better first administration than the second president in our history, our second administration. I think part of it is the first one, we almost have the romance with him, right? Like, we're kind of still learning him. And by the second, we're like, here we go, such and such. But some things that are going to pay. The first is the Wagner Act, and we talked about that on Friday, the Magna Carta of Labor, right?
Uh-oh.
We did talk about Wagner. The Wagner is going to officially legalize labor. I had to once before, and that was the NRA, and it got declared unconstitutional. So the act that does legalize labor, Wagner Act. What's the term you should remember with labor union? Collective bargaining. And so going to officially say that workers have the right to collectively bargain. The second one, Social Security officially passes under Roosevelt's second administration. And did we talk about what all Social Security covers? I think I may have done that with fourth block, but I don't think we got to it. So the things that Social Security covers. I'm a huge fan of Social Security, not necessarily a huge fan of some of the ways it's been managed, but here's why I'm a fan of Social Security. One, Miss Parkey, as I told you, I wish if I could have transferred my Social Security to her right then, I probably would have. But for elderly people, life gets more expensive in some ways when you get old. Medicine is very expensive. You have more healthcare needs when you're elderly. And so that is the purpose of Social Security, is it's to help you with those needs. Now, other things. Let's say that someone is a concert violinist. They have been playing the violin since they were very young.
They get their hands cut.
They go to college, they get a music degree, they play in the symphony, and they have some sort of accident where they lose usage of their arms or their hands or whatever. That person can no longer work in their trained field. Even if, let's say, they have an injury to where they can just no longer, maybe it messes up or a couple of fingers or something. They can't do what they once could do, right?
Just pull yourself up by your boots. Oh wait, your finger's broken.
Yeah. And so even if it's something that they could still do other jobs to maintain that same level of income, what are they going to have to do? They have to go back and get training, right, in a different field. And
I think the one with Doctor Strange.
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did not watch the show.
Yeah.
I show it to movie.
Or somebody like doctors who have like neurosis or something that happens and it causes them to lose part of that grip. Those kind of different things that knock you out of your field. For instance, my father-in-law, after he had been a foreman of construction. At one point, he was the lead foreman of construction for Zaxby's. Every time they'd build a Zaxby's, he was over them. And he had almost had a heart attack, had some heart issues. And so what was required of a foreman of construction to be out in the heat and all of those things, he would get very tired and winded, especially right after having open heart surgery. And so the company he worked for, most days, it was at-will company, so that means they could fire you whenever. And they just let him go because they said you can't do it. And so he went to unemployment. And because of his age and his field in construction, they actually filed him and put him in for disability. Because they said, we're not able to place you. These places will not hire you. And he was successful in getting that. You also see like other incidents with Social Security, death of a worker. So if a minor loses a parent who is a worker, they will often get, their guardian will get under the care with the child's name. They'll get a payment. I'll give you a couple of examples of where this has gone right and where this has gone wrong. I guess I've known Josh since I was probably in high school. Good friend of mine, kind of in high school, early college years. His name was Josh, or is Josh, and he married this girl. Can't remember her name now, but he married this girl, and they had 2 kids together. And they liked a lot to ride ATVs around and do all that kind of stuff. That was their thing. And so they were up on Grant Mountain, which is kind of close to where we all live, and they were ATVing. And apparently one of their ATVs was having some brake problems, which general word of advice, not a good time to go anywhere near a mountain when you're having brake problems, but, sometimes people aren't very smart. And so he, the way the tale is told, I was not there, but he had tried to switch places with her. He said, let me mess with that one. And, she thought he was kind of mansplaining her, I guess. And so she stayed on that ATV and kind of got too close and realized it was not going to stop with her. And so she actually threw their child off, and she went over the side with the ATV and it killed her.
I mean, not her throwing the child out.
Yeah, and I mean, Haley just turned like 19, so she was maybe 3 or 4. So that's how long ago it's been. Like I said, I can picture the girl's face, but I can't remember her name, so I really didn't know her.
Survivors.
But anyway, having said that, she had worked. She was a beautician, but she had opted into paying into Social Security, and because of that, she was their main wage earner. Because Josh didn't always like to work. Y'all don't know any of these people, so I don't feel guilty saying that. But he didn't like to work very much, and so they were able to get Social Security to help take care of the kids. You know, otherwise they would have gotten nothing had she not paid in as her own business owner, but she did choose to. I have another friend that her husband was sitting in a bar watching like a football game one evening, and these two women decided that they wanted to fight, I guess. And he and this other guy are trying to kind of break them up. And this other man doesn't like the fact that he is trying to break up this fight. He comes over and hits her husband. And the way he fell or the way he hit him or something, he was dead when he hit the floor. However, he worked construction and he had never paid into Social Security. And so as far as their kids, they were able to get nothing. And so that's why I'm a big fan of paying Social Security. That's my little splurb here, because you can think, well, things like that don't happen, but
They do.
they do. And these are two incidents where these were two healthy people. Nobody like had a heart attack out of nowhere. And neither one of them are car accidents. You know, there's a whole splurge of those. But with this, those kids, you know, that mom, she had to figure it out. She had to figure out all of that because there was nothing. Because he had just always kind of worked, and he made decent money, but he had always kind of worked construction, and he had never gotten like a paycheck that had his name on it. You know, so they did it differently. So Social Security provides if you are injured and cannot continue to work in your field, long-term disability basically. It provides elderly pension, and it also provides spousal and child benefits. Like, for instance, if someone's a stay-at-home mom, if you are dependent on that income as a spouse, then you would be eligible to, like, God forbid, something happened to my husband, because I'm a wage earner, as I'm equal or higher wage earner, I wouldn't receive anything for him, but Micah would receive something. And so that's why life insurance is important too. But that's another life discussion for a different day. Yes, real quick.
I've heard a true crime where the kids purposely try to put the parents in danger so they get money.
Oh, absolutely. And that's not new.
What kind of child does that?
I'll tell you about one of my favorite ones later. So, and it's pretty sick and twisted.
Now I wanna
All
hear
right.
about it.
Say favorite like that's a good thing.
I love true crime.
It's a true crime all the time.
I don't like that it happens, but I like to learn about it.
Yes.
So check this out. This is where Roosevelt is also very controversial. Now, we have three branches of government. And one thing I've talked to you about a lot is it's kind of like a pendulum. And we want that pendulum to kind of stay balanced, right? We don't need it to be all the way over here. And we don't need it to be all the way over here. We need to be somewhere with a balance. And I think that's a lot of why society is so stratified right now, is because balance is kind of shaky. So at this point, how is Roosevelt being treated by Congress? Are things going good for him or bad? Are they heckling him?
No, they
We've talked about like a million things that they passed, right? So basically, Congress and FDR, they are down like 4 flat tires, right? I mean, they're ready to go. The Supreme Court, though. The Supreme Court. Now, first of all, I love impressions, like your first impression when you look at a picture and I give you no context. What stands out about this picture to you?
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Old white men, that's right. They are all very white,
The hair, though.
and they are all very old. This is either going to be attendance or somebody's going to be on house arrest. We will find out. We're having a historical experience in the screen's room. I didn't take my attendance yet. All right.
I'm sorry, but that just screams the second part of Bohemian Rhapsody right there.
It really does. So these guys, my favorite is the little one on the bottom that has like he has like the crown hair going there, right? He's my fave. Okay,
Okay, they're
so
saying we will not let you go. That's what they're saying.
yes. So here's the deal. These gentlemen have different views on, like, they're saying some of the things that Roosevelt is doing or some of the things Roosevelt did is unconstitutional. Now, we looked at a couple of those. To be fair, are they completely wrong? I mean, if we're going to be real technical, it's not one of those where you're like, where in the world are they coming from, right? Because they're saying he's overexerting executive power. Which he is, because the president is not supposed to, the legislator is supposed to pass the laws. Now, so they keep declaring things that he's doing unconstitutional. Again, is that their right? I mean, as the case comes to them, remember you guys read about the sketchy chicken case, right? And then there's problems that are being said with the Agriculture Adjustment Act. And again, we talked about where that could be considered unconstitutional.
They should be fine. I mean, Social Security cannot hit them in a couple of years. How old they were.
Now,
So,
FDR, though, is going to do something that, how do I say this nicely? He really stirs it up here. We'll just go with that. So, so far, Congress has supported so much that FDR has tried to do that they don't anticipate that to change. All right? So, FDR proposes an act, and this has kind of been something that's been brought up, not necessarily by the current administration, but it's been something that's mentioned as what if this is done, okay? And he proposes reforming the Supreme Court because he felt some of these justices were holding him back. And so here is the bill that he tries to get Congress to pass. Here's the bill he tries to get Congress to pass. He wants to go ahead because the president has the right to replace people who retire or who die.
What if they're super old?
That's what he's wanting to do. He asked Congress for the power to appoint extra justices for each justice who did not retire at 70. If he could have done this,
everybody.
he would have replaced 6 of them.
Oh, that's how many?
Now, if you are, there's 9 in total, he gets to add 6 more. And he has about 3 to 4 that are supporting him.
Right.
So looking at this objectively,
He has everybody.
is
He's trying to get everybody to support him.
he's trying to get his way, basically, where all 3 branches of government are in his pocket. And he's doing that by trying to manipulate the system. So whether you agree with that courts need to be changed, can this be dangerous?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you start, I mean, that's one of the things that makes our government stable, right? Is
Constitution is a living document, so it can
It
be
is.
changed. I mean,
that he's not asking for an amendment.
No, he's like.
So if you want to,
that would have been a better
if you
idea.
want to change it, it should be an amendment, right? And why do I say it should be an amendment? Because amendments require a little higher number. And, you start meddling with things too much that are the foundations of the government, it needs to be a little, to keep it stable, it needs to be a little still. Now, his own party was like, whoa, hold on here.
What?
His own party. In fact, there is a cartoon. I tried to find it the other day. It's one I use sometimes, and it shows FDR, and he's watching a donkey because he was a Democrat, right? And the donkey is just going wild. And he's like, all I said was give me 6 more justices. And so the idea was even his own party's like, okay, step it back. Yes.
At this time, did the party start to change? Like,
Not in the way you're thinking. Now you do see
Okay.
it is during this era.
because I know the Republicans were more like anti-slavery and Democrats were like
It is under Roosevelt
enslaving people.
that African Americans began to vote more Democratic. And it's because they see Roosevelt's policies. And so we do see a shift of that demographic under FDR, but some of your other demographics, not so much. So
So it's
we're good.
more like personal choice rather than
Yes, at this point, yes. All right, so here's what we see. Roosevelt lost the fight, but here's the deal. It's one of those things if you wait long enough, right? So, and he's going to be president for 4 terms. So by the time Roosevelt dies in his fourth term, where he kind of looks like death eating on a cracker, like these
Anybody
guys,
said,
he gets to replace all 6 of them. And after this, the court really does kind of chill out. The court, I mean, they don't let everything go, but they do try to kind of work with them a little bit. And truthfully, if the people on the court are what they say they are, if they're willing to look at the law and look at the system, then what we will see is that we see a more fair and balanced thing. Now, moving along, a couple of other things here. I think it's just really kind of a significant thing. And I think it's kind of neat that he does eventually get to replace all of them anyway. You know, so it's kind of one of those things. Sometimes you just have to wait and buy your time, right? All right. So let's finish up with the gradual decline of the New Deal. So first of all, Roosevelt pulled back the reins some. Why? Because these are expensive. I mean, they're funneling tax dollars into all of this stuff. And so he tries to pull back the reins around 1937, 36, 37. And what happens is there's another business slump and factories start to close. And so Roosevelt's just kind of like, well, whatever, let's just keep pouring the money in, which is not good either, right? So it's that balance. Unemployment was rising when that happened. The size of the national debt starts to give some alarm, which by today, the size of the national debt then was huge.
How much is that?
Oh, I'd have to look, but it's
6 trillion. Or
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, it's nothing compared to what they thought was a
What
debt.
do you think
Roosevelt did try to cut back, as we said, but as we said, a lot of those public works workers were not able to find jobs because they're still unskilled, and so it doesn't necessarily take care of it. There are some programs with the New Deal that show a lot of merit. I mean, we still see Social Security today. We rave about the FDIC. You still see forms of the AAA. And so where we want to kind of transition here is we want to talk about some other things that are a significant part of Roosevelt's administration and things that you need to be aware of. And before I kind of switch gears here, I want to make sure you understand this. What truly ended the Great Depression for America? For the United States?
Second World War.
War production from World War II.
Jobs.
Had it not, jobs. I mean, that's it. Consistent jobs. Had it not been for that, we don't know how that would have all played out. And it would have played out in some way or another.
What kept us out of the depression was the fact that the entire rest of the world was in rubble. We were the only
I mean,
ones
that's it.
that was peace.
Because the war was essentially the cause of the depression, then what happened after World War II when the jobs were?
We
Well, they
capitalized
never
on
quit
it.
the spending. And we also go into the Cold War nuclear buildup. And so military spending stays high.
And we capitalized on the fact that the rest of the world was
Now,
destroyed.
check this out. War is good for the economy. So check this out. Here's one of the court packing cartoons. You see all the old guys and see all the new members that Roosevelt picked that look just like him. So he picked people who would agree with him.
Sounds a bit like someone recently did.
Well, check this out. New Deal plan for enlarged Supreme Court. So this is the old Supreme Court building that still exists. And with FDR's new buildings, they're going to be pretty big. Well, and to be honest, though, every president picks people who they think agree with them. They all do.
I can't throw shade, right?
Yeah, you can throw shade, but and I thought it was interesting, no matter how you feel about how everything shook out afterwards, that the judges that Trump was able to appoint, that they actually didn't agree with him.
I know.
On the
that
court
was so
cases,
funny. They
so.
completely turned around on him.
I thought it was interesting. I try to find, instead of getting invested in politics so much because it, can drive you crazy, but I just try to find like the
His whole
The insight.
legal team dropped out a couple of days ago.
I mean, it happens. All right. So another thing that happens under FDR that's very significant is the appointment of Frances Perkins. Frances Perkins is the first female cabinet member. She is the first female cabinet member. She becomes the Secretary of Labor, which was a new department created by FDR, which is perfect during the New Deal when you're trying to create jobs, right? Now, I mentioned her to you once before. She survived one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history. Anybody know what that was?
Was it the one with, like,
It was not like the
Yes.
fire in that
Oh, the
place.
triangle.
The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. She was one of the few survivors. And so who better to represent workers than somebody who has had a personal taste of workplace tragedy. And so Francis Perkins is going to be the Secretary of Labor. Some other things that FDR does, he has a group of African American advisors on African American issues. Now, to me, this is kind of like a duh moment. You know, if you're trying to represent a specific group, you need to talk to people who are members of, that group, right? And so FDR sets up a group that is nicknamed his Black Cabinet. Of course, cabinet, presidential advisors. And so these were advisors specifically on issues that involved African Americans. And one of my favorite members of his crew also, how many of you have ever heard of Mary McLeod Bethune? Like 2 people. She is, to me, one of the unsung Black history heroes that really doesn't get talked about. In fact, there's a series of books called the JoJo series, not Jojo Rabbit. And it's about different lesser known African American people that have made major accomplishments. And it's not your Martin Luther Kings, it's not your Jackie Robinsons, it's people like Mary McLeod Bethune that people just don't know about.
There's several different.
Do what, huh?
There's several different kinds.
Yes, this will be a different JoJo. So Mary McLeod, her deal is that she is over the National Youth Administration. I mean, that's huge. You know, not only did he appoint a woman, well, whether he appointed her or somebody in his administration did, but not only is she a woman, but also at this time she was a woman of color, which made it much harder for her to receive those kind of positions. Both of those would have been, unfortunately, considered strikes against her in the 1930s. And so I think that is such a huge accomplishment that she is able to do this, and she does it so well. So huge Mary McLeod Bethune fan. And then the last person that I really want to talk to you about is this lady, Marian Anderson. I love the picture of her on the left. I think it's absolutely beautiful. So Marian Anderson is an opera singer.
She looks like the girl who plays Maze on Lucifer.
Yeah. But I think she is just absolutely a beautiful woman. And she was a very talented singer. Now, as I told you when we talked about the Harlem Renaissance, I mentioned her. And I said, we're going to come back to her, but I just am going to go ahead and let you know she's not a jazz singer. Because when we think of African-American music in the 20s, we plug into you so much jazz that you're like, oh, Mary McLeod Bethune, was she a jazz singer? No, I'm sorry, not Mary McLeod. Marian Anderson.
Yeah.
Sorry. She was not. She was an opera singer. And she's considered to be one of the best opera singers who have ever lived. Now, for me personally, opera is not something that I necessarily have a love for, although I've heard when you see it live, sometimes it's just a whole different experience. I would probably try an opera out. However, I can appreciate that there's talent there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There are styles of music that aren't my favorite to listen to, but I can listen and realize the person performing has talent. And so Marian truly has a beautiful, talented voice. Now, here's the deal. Have you ever heard an expression about somebody who's unattractive, which Marian is not, but have you ever heard the expression they have a face for radio?
Oh,
That's me.
What does that say?
it's
You're not.
something that they're not fun
You're
to
better
look
off
at,
using
but
your voice.
That they sound great. So Marian doesn't have a face for radio, but radio hides what you look like. Like if you ever listen to a singer and you really like that singer, and then you saw them in person and you're like, I just didn't, that's not what I thought they would look like. So Marian Anderson, her music is heard all over the U.S. by a particular group that kind of catches a liking to her called the Daughters of the American Revolution. And this little group of ladies book Marian Anderson to give a performance in a building of theirs in D.C. called Constitutional Hall.
They don't know.
And guess what arrives very shortly? Promotional material. And Fabian is ahead of me on this. What did they not understand in that promotion material there, Fabian?
Emotion or
African American.
They didn't know she was African American because they didn't think of African American opera singers. They were expecting her to be a white lady. And so Marian Anderson arrives. Well, her promotional material arrives. And they see her image and they're like, yeah, we got to fix this. This is not happening. And so they cancel her concert.
You can't change her skin color. I mean, come on, like.
I don't know, Michael Jackson.
Well, dum. Okay.
It was just a severe case of vitiligo. Come on.
That's like his doctors stick by that, but
Yeah.
Definitely. he definitely, whether it was that or not, he definitely
It
changed.
was a
dramatically.
great coincidence.
Now,
Great.
Hey, you know what?
It was very.
Who knows? But Marian Anderson gets her concert is canceled. Now, if that were the end of the story, it would just be one more example of racism and prejudice that
Something happens.
honestly would probably get like swept under a rug, right?
But
And we might not even hear about it anymore. However, the world was a better place because of another lady named Eleanor Roosevelt.
That sounds
And Eleanor Roosevelt found out about what happened with Marian Anderson. And remember, she is a champion for women and for people who are downtrodden. And so she had joined the Daughters of the American Revolution many years before. And it was kind of one of those political things that, like, women who were involved in politics, or, well, let me say this, women who were married to men involved in politics were kind of expected to be in these civic groups, right? And still, you see that a lot today. She hadn't been very active in the group. It was something to add to her resume. And so what happens with Eleanor, when she hears this, she officially sends the DAR a letter and tells them, look, I was probably a sucking member anyway, so you're not really going to care, but what you did to Marian Anderson was wrong. I quit.
Oh, no.
And that letter, you can actually read it. It is a primary source that's available. And to add to that, she wasn't done. So she went in and talked to Franklin.
Uh-oh.
She said, we need to fix this.
No more.
And so Harold Ickes, who is over one of the Works Progress groups, and some others, they got together, and with the urging and leadership of Eleanor Roosevelt, who's always behind the scenes, right? She set up a concert for Marian Anderson on Easter morning at the Lincoln Memorial. Marian Anderson is going to give a free concert there, which will be paid for, which she will be paid for, obviously. But it was the largest ever attendance for a concert up to that point in U.S. history. And so I love that Eleanor Roosevelt took this moment, and instead of just, demanding like they let her in, because they really couldn't do that. It's a private organization. They have the right to hire or fire who they want to. But she took this and she made this a beautiful moment. And in fact, if you know much about the March on Washington, the March on Washington was held on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And the place where Dr. King spoke about his dream is where Marian Anderson had once stood and sang. And so if you are ever visit the Lincoln Memorial and you go in the gift shop, one of the things they have pictures of Marian standing there. And they also, of course, have pictures of Dr. King and other civil rights leaders. But play this for you real quickly so you can get a little grasp.
Genius draws no color line. And so it is fitting that Marian Anderson should raise her voice in tribute to the noble Lincoln whom mankind will ever honor. Miss Marian Anderson. My country, dear,
Now, it may not be your, look at that. I mean, Forrest Gump would be proud how many people were out there, right? And notice all of those different, if you looked at the different microphones, they all had different radio call stations. So her voice was played out across the nation. And again, may not be your style of music. It's not mine. But she obviously has a talent. And she gave a whole concert, and that was just kind of her opening song there. But anyway, so leaving Marian here, and talking about kind of the legacy of the New Deal. The New Deal, one of the criticisms of it is it has created what we call a welfare state. A welfare state. Now, I'm not using the term here as in, welfare is in payment to people in that form, but it means that it is our expectation as a nation for the government to take care of us. And, people will say, well, I don't expect that, but, then as soon as the stimulus check goes, where's my check, And so we have certain expectations of what the government is supposed to do, our government for us, and it starts here. Now, whether those expectations are good or bad, it does create, though, when things are expected of you, it is a lot more pressure. Why is it so hard to get out of our national debt? Because we don't want the government to cut our programs. We all want them to cut programs, but we don't want them to cut our programs, right? Cut whatever you want to, but not that. And so this is a problem that is started here, and the solution is one we haven't figured out as of yet. And it's only, the deficit spending is so easy to do. And deficit spending is economically proven to be a good thing to do in economic hardships. But then when you get past those economic hardships, you have to cut back that spending. And that's not what our country has cycled to do. And so this is where this gets tricky. The last thing I want to leave you with is a series of photos. Dorothea Lange is a Depression-era photographer. She was part of a photo project that was part of the New Deal. And this is a series. She was sent out west. In fact, the day after she got married, this is Dorothea Lange, she was sent out west to take pictures. Because one of the things I love about some of the projects that are done as part of the New Deal is they had the sense to realize. Do what, huh?
You bring pants.
Yeah. But they had the sense to realize that women, well, not women, excuse me, but that these time periods would not last forever. And that when all of this came to an end, how would we have the historical records to know what these things look like? And so they paid different photographers, much like they paid people like we talked about with doing all these different projects to build things, to document this in pictures. There's also a group called the Federal Writers Project, and who specifically does a project called the Slave Narratives. I made you watch some slave narratives when we covered the Civil War. And this is where young men and women who were writers that didn't have money were paid to go out and meet people who had been alive during slavery and interview them. And those interviews still exist, and you can read them and listen to them if you choose. But Dorothea is paid to be a photographer. And so she goes out west, and here you see her on top of her car making pictures. Now, she had been through all sorts of migrant camps. This is a pea picking farm. And she saw these people picking things, and she would take pictures of that so we would have documentation for years to come. However, and keep in mind, Dorothea is not the only artist that is a photographer during this time. She's not the only successful one, but she does become the name of photography during the Depression, because after she had finished her contracted work, she was on her way home. Keep in mind, she got married literally the day she left. And so she is going back home to be reunited with her husband, and she drives by this one family. And she saw something in that family that just she felt was important. And so Dorothea turns around and she goes back. And it is from that family that lived in this squatter camp that she makes this famous picture. And anytime you read a book on the Depression that has pictures, or you open a textbook about the Depression, this is the photo. It's called The Migrant Mother. This was a migrant mother that was a farm worker, and she was traveling with her kids. And if I remember the story correctly, the husband had died or abandoned them, because there was a lot of problems with men abandoning their families because they just felt like their job was to provide and they couldn't do it because they didn't have jobs. And so they just left. Many of them would hobo. This is my favorite picture she took, actually. You have the two hobo guys there, and it says, next time, try the train. Of course, they can't try the train, so, but anyway. It is one of my faves. Yeah, be illegal. But this picture of her with the 3 children that she's holding and just the grief on her face, this is not an old woman. If you look at her forehead, she looks aged. See those worry lines up there? And, life has not been easy for her. And here on her lap, she holds this new baby. And so this is considered to be the Depression era photo. And I feel like it would be amiss not to mention that and to mention Dorothea to you, because she is one of my favorites. Now, we need to have